Okay, in this parak, we're learning about turning away from this world to Hashem, so you can't be busy wiping your table. Right? Okay, so what we're going to do in this shiur is continue the discussion from last week, and in Mitzvah Hashem, the plan is the next shiur and the one afterwards, but the next one will start paragraph number 2, the Rambam's Moshel, which seems to be the conclusion of the whole book. But I want to continue now the discussion that we began last time, which is that in this chapter, Chelik Gimel Perek Nun Aleph, there's a turn. A very important turn occurs, which where the Rambam announces a kind of something that became clear to him, paragraph number 23. I don't use the word revelation. I don't think it's the word he uses has the sense of a revelation, even though the Mifam Mishatayr translates it nigla. I think it means something became clear to him, something became manifest to him. And that's a turning point, because Rambam announces it as a turning point. He says, now something became clear to me. He wants us to realize that something occurred. Okay? He doesn't have to tell us when he had the chiddush. He wants us to realize that there's a shift, an inflection. At least in that point in time, meaning something caused something to happen, something to become clear, but also that this serves as a kind of turning point in this parak, and that's because, and what is the chiddush there? That when a person is thinking about Hashem, the hashgacha, divine providence on him is complete, and no evil can befall him at the moment he is thinking about Hashem. Okay, amazing thing, amazing. So basically, you learn this book. And if you know how to think about Hashem, that is, we were discussing that a little before the shiur. How do you do that? But of course, a lot of this sefer is here to train you in that very thing. And then nothing evil can befall you when you're thinking about Hashem. That's the nature of divine providence. And the Rambam says this solves the problem of divine providence in a way that he has an interesting expression, which we'll look at later. Even according to the philosopher's requirements, this solves the problem of divine providence. So in other words, even though the Rambam treated of the issue of hashgacha, the prakim of hashgacha, he nonetheless feels there's something to add here, which provides a kind of new solution to the problem, or a greater one, and somehow is responding to the philosophers even on their terms. He has some expression like that. We'll take a look at that later. But there's some sort of tension here, and it's an inflection point in the chapter. Why is there some tension? Because what Rambam's teaching in this chapter is a kind of worship of Hashem that involves disengagement from anything, everything. Because Hashem is what's left after you strip away everything. So it's not so much don't do this, but think about Hashem. This takes us back, as we mentioned, I think, in last year, takes us back to the chapters on the attributes, volume 1, 50 through 60, where the Rambam tells us that he approaches Hashem via negativa, negative theology. Apophatically, we can only define Hashem in the negative. So similarly, turning towards Hashem means turning away from everything else. Ad kedei kach, that the Rambam says, this is in paragraph number where does he say it's the purpose of the whole Torah? In paragraph number 17, the Rambam says, I'll read it inside. So here the Rambam gives another treatment of the reasons for all mitzvahs. Kriyas HaTorah, Tefillah, and the doing of all mitzvahs. Kriyas HaTorah and Tefillah, because that's the main thing through which the Rambam trains us to turn away from everything and towards Hashem. But then he throws in all of mitzvahs, doing all mitzvahs. The purpose is nothing but for training you to be busy with his commandments over being busy with matters of this world. It's as if you're busy with God. Now, you're not busy with God, you're busy with his commandment, but busy with his commandment as opposed to anything worldly, is like being busy with him. And therefore, if you daven and you're thinking about this world, then you're missing the point. Okay. You're missing the whole purpose. So the Rambam reinterprets all mitzvahs in light of this new worship. And this point I learned from Professor Joseph Stern in one of his books, maybe a few of them, where not only is this a new reason for the mitzvahs, different than the Rambam treated of in the previous 25 chapters, we went through Tamei mitzvahs, but it actually goes in the opposite direction. Because what the Rambam did in the Tamei mitzvahs was he told us that all mitzvahs have a reason, a practical reason. They actually achieve something. But here the Rambam says that the purpose of mitzvahs is to turn away from this world and to be busy with Hashem over anything of this world. Now, by this criteria, the more the less purpose the mitzvah has in this world, the more it accomplishes its purpose of being a means of transcending this world. So not only does the Rambam give us now a new Tamei mitzvah which sort of replaces what he said till now, but it actually goes in the completely opposite direction, which is consistent with the fact that this chapter is here to teach, as we started, the avodah miyuchedes for those that are masik Hashem. There's a certain kind of avodah for everyone else, and that avodah is defined by Taryag mitzvahs, probably, according to the reasons that are given in the previous 25 chapters. But then there's a kind of avodah miyuchedes for those who know Hashem, and they have something much more interesting to do than be busy with this world, which actually involves turning away from this world. And for them too, the mitzvahs have the function, but the opposite kind of function that has for everyone else.
But doesn't he say that you have to know, you have to have the right kavanah, the purpose of the mitzvah when you're doing it in this chapter?
Yeah.
But doesn't that harken back to the reasons that he gave, those practical reasons that you said in the part of the animal? I mean, you're seeing this reason as mutually exclusive from all of those.
Okay. So in this, right. So in this paragraph,
this
right.
is not just a specific instruction for how to deploy those practical reasons.
Right.
In your performance of mitzvahs.
Right. So in this paragraph, he says the purpose of mitzvahs. He says, so if you're doing a mitzvah and you're doing it with your limbs, without considering the meaning of that action, nor who's its source and what its purpose is, then you haven't achieved the goal. So that's interesting. When he says the meaning, does he mean taking us back to those chapters?
To those chapters.
Okay.
To know the time in order to perform the mitzvah properly.
Okay, that's very interesting. Fine. But I think if don't you agree that if the purpose of the mitzvah is to take you away from this world, then the more unreasonable it is, the more it's effective?
Purpose is to take you away from this world?
To turn you away from this world, then the less reasonable it is, the more effective it is. Because the less it associates with anything that we're familiar with, the more it's automatically a kind of transcending.
But why does it have to be unreasonable? Why can't it be the highest expression of reason?
Because that's not God. Unless it is. But then things get complicated. Okay, that was a side point. I was just bringing up that the Rambam in this chapter is training us for a kind of turning away from this world. And then what's the big revelation or realization that occurred to him? Something that cuts a little bit in a different direction, which is that when a person is thinking about Hashem, his material affairs will be ordered. Nothing evil will befall him in this world. Now, what's Hashem all about? If Hashem is otherworldly, then maybe this world doesn't matter. Look, if your whole avodah is to turn away from this world and think about Hashem, that means that that's what matters most. And then at the same time, we learn in this chapter that actually when you do that, the whole world is going to be amazing, and nothing evil is going to happen. Nothing evil is going to happen in the material world. So it's a little bit going in a different direction than the thrust of the whole chapter. And as we discussed last week, and this inflection happens after the Rambam says, I could tell you how to approach Hashem like all the Nevi'im, besides for Moshe, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because all the Nevi'im, this training gets to the level of the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im are those who turn away from everything else and focus on Hashem. I cannot train you how to be like Moshe, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who, while engaged with this world, were thinking about Hashem. That's something that I cannot train you to do. That's in paragraph number 19. At the end of 18, he says, this is the most a person can reach through this kind of training, but that a person should be busy with this world, talking to people, while at the same time thinking about Hashem. That's something, that's not just the level of the Nevi'im, that's the level of Moshe and the Avos. And they united with Hashem in this way. Okay. and they achieved hashgacha while they were thinking about Hashem and engaged in this world, because at that time they were thinking about Hashem, and that's not something I could train you to do. But we can daven to Hashem to remove them. And then he had this revelation. So this turning point happens in the chapter. The inflection happens after he notes that there's this kind of higher level that's beyond us, which does unite thinking about Hashem and engagement with this world. And then he says, we can only daven to Hashem. And by the way, my reading last week was the Rambam did daven, and that's why he says, now it was revealed to me, because look, we have to daven, so we're stuck. He's basically saying we're stuck. Our limits are Shar Nevi'im. We cannot be like Yaakov and Moshe, but that's no fun. We want to be like Yaakov and Moshe, but we're not supposed to be, or we can't go there. We'll talk about that soon. What exactly Rambam is saying, why you stop right there. But nonetheless, we want to daven to Hashem to be on that level. So what do you think the Rambam did right then? He davened, and Ato Nigli Heaven Niflo, which involves this kind of breaking the barrier between thinking about Hashem and this world. At least this far the Rambam reached, that while you think about Hashem, nothing evil happens to you.
There's a part of that word about fear, right?
Few.
There's no sentence. This doesn't have a couple of noms.
It certainly does. So that's what I was saying before, that here, the Rambam earlier already established that hashgacha and intellect go together. Intellect, of course, means thinking about Hashem, because that's the ultimate truth. So the link between hashgacha and seichel was already well established in the prakim. That was Rambam's big chiddush in those prakim. What he adds over here, it seems to be his additional point over here, is that there's a kind of one-to-one relationship or a temporal relationship, which is at the moment you're thinking about Hashem, no evil happens to you. So not just that there's a loose relationship, but there's a very close relationship between the two. Why is that so interesting? Why is that a qualitatively new kind of chiddush? I don't know. But yeah, if we get up to there, which I probably won't, but we could. That's one thing to really learn, is to understand how the two discussions of hashgacha go together, and also, like I said before, he says, like, now I'm responding to philosophers even according to what they require. It seems like, I'll show you that sentence later, but it seems like, although he dealt with hashgacha in a way that he considered solved the problem of evil, the philosophers clearly did not consider his treatment to be adequate, because the philosophers don't hold of hashgacha. That's a big thing in those prakim. Philosophers deny hashgacha in this world because they see things are disorderly. The Rambam rebuts them, and he thinks that he solved the problem of hashgacha in those chapters. But the philosophers don't think so. Clearly, they're chaylik. And the Rambam seems to be saying here is that whatever the sheet of the philosophers, why they weren't masking them to my teretz over there, this is a teretz. This, if it's true, philosophers would have to accept. Seems to be what he's saying over here. Okay, so requires Ian. What exactly is that machlekes about, that the philosophers don't hold of his teretz and he does, and why this answer is even according to philosophers' considerations, and then also why is this left separately? Why in the prakim of hashgacha does he wants to have one treatment and then he has this later, at the end? It's a very interesting, important questions.
Well, if it was written chronologically, it would only occur.
Yeah, but that's a bad answer, because at least we could ask, why was the hashgacha such that the Rambam, who for sure had hashgacha, at least when he was writing the Marvuchim and thinking about Hashem. So I don't like that answer. Okay? And nor does Rambam now say, like, okay, now go back and redo it. If you would say, okay, now we have to really rewrite the prakim, but you already received them, so combine what I told you over here to what we did here. He could have done that. If this is like an updating of that prior discussion, then he could have made it clear that, like, now we have to update it. No. Because he had everything worked out when he was 18. That's what I think. Except when he changes, and when he erased, in the previous Mishnayos, Mishnah. No, I don't think he ever. Look, it's very interesting. This, in a way, this might be like his big, the one thing we know that I'm like learned at a point in time. This chiddush. Everything else seems to just be there from when he was a little kid. Seriously, I'm saying you look in this first book, that it's Treatise of Logic, and you'll see things that after you learn the Meira and the Mishnah and the Bishul Mishnayos, he was already thinking in those patterns and those structures.
Speaking of Hakdama to Chiluk Gimel, though, he references like working things out. I don't think he says when, but like the sequence of Meiser and Torah.
Yeah.
Right, he references that.
Okay, but when did it happen? For when?
Right.
It doesn't say when.
Even that could be when he was a teenager.
I think so. I don't know. Just seems to me. Anyways, so that's what happened over here. Okay. And by the way, it's very interesting because in this chapter, the Rambam teaches us how to daven. Avodah Shebelev. He defines Avodah Shebelev in this chapter. And in this chapter, he says, and we should daven. Okay? 3 things happen in this chapter. He defines Avodah Shebelev. He doesn't say the word Zu Tefillah, but he says Avodah Shebelev. He doesn't say Zu Tefillah, but clearly this is Tefillah in Rambam's understanding. Okay, it's another discussion. Tefillah really means thinking about Hashem, not the words. And that's Avodah Shebelev. And he tells us what we should do is daven, because there are certain barriers that we cannot traverse, but we can at least daven that Hashem should remove them. And in my reading, his tefillah was answered and something was revealed to him. Okay, in the very chapter that he tells us how to be mitzvah. Okay. So now this same kind of tension between, so what's the tension over here? On the one hand, we have this idea that everything about truth, the highest calling of man, is turning away from this world. And then we have, which is to say, okay, Hashem is transcendent. And that's consistent with what we learned in the Prakim of Ta'arim, that Hashem is really above all categories. All the midas of Hashem are really not him. They're just descriptions of his actions, but his essence is above any activity even, okay? Because his activity is not rooted in his character. He has no character, etc., etc. So that's the big move in this chapter. We turn away from Hashem. But then we learn that, no, actually Hashem does involve with the world because the others got his kind of involvement. At the moment they were thinking about Hashem, they were able to do that. And then we learn that Hashem is involved with the world when you're thinking about him, which is to say when you're not thinking about the world, okay? For us, for not the others, right? We can't think about the world. We can't do things with the world. The others could engage with the world and think about Hashem. We can't engage with the world and think about Hashem. So we don't even engage with the world. We have to lie in our beds and think about Hashem. Now, this same tension appears in Perek Nodal. I mentioned this briefly last week. Let's look at it a little closely now. So the last parak of the Sefer is about what does Chachma mean, what does Torah mean, and the Rambam deals there at length with the pasuk we read on Tisha B'Av, pasuk in Yirmiyah, that says what a person should be proud of. Al Yishalel Chacham b'Chachmasai. Al Yishalel Gibur b'Gibur Al Yishalel Ashir b'Ashrei. Kim b'Zayis Yishalel Amsal Haskell v'Yodoisi. This is in paragraph number 10. And I want to go back to paragraph number 5. The Rambam says there are 4 kinds of perfections that a human can have. The first perfection, which is the lowest one, and most people are busy with, is to make money, perfection in their wealth. Okay, why is that the lowest one? Because there's no connection between the person himself and the wealth, just any kind of nominal connection. You could just say, or it's an imaginary connection. This is my house. So what does that mean? It doesn't actually mean anything tangible, anything concrete. Okay. Second level of perfection is more connected to the person himself, which is that his body should be healthy. Okay, but that's bodily. That's not mental. That's not nothing involved the mind or the character. It's just about the body. You share that with an animal. Third level is, which is more about the person, is about a person having perfection in character. Okay. But, says the Rambam, perfection of character is really not for yourself, it's for someone else. Because if no one would exist but for you, or it doesn't say that. If you would be by yourself, without any other person, be on a desert island, there'd be no need for a good character. Okay, which by the way is a questionable statement, because what about gluttony? If you're alone on an island, but you're a glutton, then you're going to maybe get a heart attack because you're eating too much. So, okay, it's an interesting question. Okay, fine. So the fourth level, shleimus, that, now I'm going to read this is paragraph number 8. Hamin Aravi hu shleimus anushis amitis. This is the true human perfection, shahi, hasagas, hamailas, hasichlias. Okay, true human perfection defined now is knowing truths, intellectual truths. Kalaimar, tfisas muskalis, grasping intelligibles. Hamalamdas deas nachles b'metaphysica. To learn the true things about metaphysics. Why metaphysics? That's the most true thing. V'zuya tachlis ha'acharayna. This is the final purpose. V'hi ha'maviyaz al mashlemus amitasai. That's what brings humans to this true perfection. V'hi loy levadai. That's only you get that because you don't share that with anyone else. That's what makes you eternal. And that's what makes a person a person. Okay. So he says that's pshat in the pasuk. This is in paragraph number 10. That's pshat in the pasuk in Yirmiyah. Alis al chacham b'chachmasei means chacham means midos. Why is chacham mean midos? He treats that in this paragraph. Okay. So the pasuk goes like this: a person shouldn't be proud of the fact that he has good character. Neither should be proud of being having strength, and he shouldn't be proud of having money. Rather, what? Seichel. That's exactly what the philosophers say. In the beginning of paragraph number 10, he says, "Gam hanavim bi'arulonu v'sa'inim atzmam upirshu azmon kamoisha pirshu ma'filosofim." The Nevi'im also explained this exactly like the philosophers. Philosophers went through these 4 levels, and if you read Yirmiyah, you'll see Yirmiyah also rejects the first 3 and says the only purpose of man is, the highest purpose of man is knowledge. Now, in paragraph number 13, the Rambam does this major turn, the bend, all the way at the end of the Moreh Nevuchim, and just changes everything. And he says the following, and this is, of course, right there we have one of these classic flags, which is the Rambam like this. But once we mention this pasuk and the wondrous things that are included in this pasuk, so Kid Rambam is saying like this. Oh, I mentioned that pasuk. Let me finish to talk about that pasuk. And now he's going to tell us the major chiddush, changes everything. And this is Rambam's way of throwing off the reader who's not capable of really understanding the secrets of the Meir. And he'll say, okay, the Rambam's just finishing up over here. He's doing some bookkeeping because he mentioned the pasuk. So but he already told us what he has to tell us. But no, Rambam's going to tell us something which undercuts everything he said till now. The pasuk hazeh, in this pasuk that defines the highest goal of man. Very important pasuk. It doesn't suffice with saying, okay, the highest goal is to know Hashem. Mishum, had the Navi meant to say the highest goal is knowing Hashem, the pasuk would have said, stop right there. Everyone knows the end of the pasuk. The pasuk could have said to know Hashem. Okay, could have talked about metaphysics about Hashem. Doesn't say that. It's not enough to know Hashem, you have to know Hashem's actions. Okay. And those are, what are the pillars of Hashem? Chesed, Mishpat, Tzedakah. Paragraph number 14. So now, what is the highest goal of man? Not just to know Hashem, not just to know metaphysics, but to know the nature of the world, which is God's activity. And it adds a word. It doesn't say Ani Hashem Moshe Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. It says Ani Hashem Moshe Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah Ba'aretz, Shezehu Tzir HaTorah. This is an axis of the Torah. Like a machash from spouts shechashvu shakaskosi is alam mistayim it's a gagaloi reach. Here again, the Rambam does battle with the philosophers who say, no, the world is disorderly. The heavens are orderly, but the earth has no order. All sorts of weird things happen here. Therefore, Azav Hashem es haaretz. No, rather, not only the heavens, which clearly follow in order, but even Aretz is ordered. What does it mean Hashem Haaretz? Hashem is mashgiach in earth as is appropriate for earth, just like he's mashgiach in the heavens. Now, the pasuk says Elech Chafatzi is Hashem's will. Hashem wants us to also exhibit and enact this kind of chesed mishpat tzedakah. Shehama Torah, the goal is lehida mois lahen v'shir derchenu, we should be like the 13 meters. Now look at this. Sheshleimus ha'adam sheispar bo be'emes he. So originally he told us the shleimus atachlis is this. Now he says no. Pasuk says the real shleimus that a person should really be proud of is but not just that. Not just knowing Hashem in his transcendental self, but rather to know how Hashem is mashgiach, how he brings things to existence and manages them, and not just that, not just to know things, but the person himself should, in his own life, emulate those same ways. Okay, so the Rambam did this major turn, and he says, that the Navi says the same thing that the philosophers say. Philosophers say it's not about money, health, or character. It's about knowledge. The Nevi'im also say the same thing, but then the Nevi'im say it's about knowledge, not of Hashem's essence, but of Hashem's activity, the nature of His divine providence, and then a person has to learn that and emulate that. I want to just read the last paragraph. So there's a big contradiction within this chapter 54. I just want to read the last paragraph because we're going to get back to it. So this is what I want to include in this treatise, which is beneficial for people like you. So he's addressing the individual reader of the Talmud. I wish to you, if you think about this deeply, you will understand it all. And then Hashem will merit us. So now he says, there's me, the master, you, the student. You can unlock the secrets of this book if you work on it, you understand everything. Along with us, will earn etc. Fine, we'll all be enlightened. Okay, so what do we see over here? We see that I'm pointing out that there's a similar kind of tension we have in our chapter and we have in 54, which is the final goal of man to be detached from this world and focus only on intellectual truths, or is to be engaged with this world. That's explicitly a contradiction to 54, but I'm seeing the same kind of tension in 51, which is on the one hand, the way to serve Hashem is to disengage from the world, turn away from the world. On the other hand, the Rambam discovered that there's a hashkacha on the person who does that in his worldly affairs. Okay, and both we saw in this paragraph, in this parak Nun Daled, we see how the Rambam says, look, the Navi says, unlike the Mispartzim who claim that Hashem is Mashgiach, the Navi says, no, Hashem is Mashgiach on the world. And in parak Nun Aleph, the Rambam also makes that point that this new chiddush he discovered about hashkacha is a rebuttal of the opinion of the philosophers, as I mentioned before. I want to show you this inside. Paragraph 24, let's see. Yep, second paragraph within 24.
Yeah.
No, yeah, 51:24, right. Okay, so he says, all the Nevi'im were Anshe Amayla, that anything of this worldly kind of evil befell them, it's only because they weren't thinking about Hashem. Now we solved the great problem that brought the philosophers to think that there's no hashkacha on human beings individually. And then he says, even according to the opinions of the philosophers, who weren't happy with my treatment of hashkacha, is my reading of this. Now, once we accept this old chiddush, we solve the problem, even according to the philosophers' positions.
And the whole objection is from Tzaddik Varalik?
Yeah. Yeah. Rambam says in the Perplexed, the philosophers denied hashkacha because they said the world is not orderly. Okay, and Rambam discovered a kind of order in Perek Nun Dal. In Perek Nun Aleph, Rambam discovered a kind of order, which is that the person who's thinking about Hashem is completely ordered. Nothing happens to him that shouldn't happen to him. Tzaddik V'Raloi is he who's not thinking about Hashem. Is that how he now would interpret Tzaddik Gomer or Tzaddik Sheni Gomer in the Gemara? I don't know. Perhaps. And in Perek Nun Daled, he also does battle, his final battle, once again, he hacks those who deny hashkach. Okay? So I want to explain that. I want to think a little bit about what was nischadish to the Rambam and how these two things could coincide, these two kinds of shittas. The Rambam tells us that he cannot train us how to be like Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe. Why not? Why exactly is it that the Rambam says that's something that I cannot train you to do? So remember in paragraph 20 through 22, Rambam describes Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Let's read that inside. And I want you to think about this question. Okay, the Rambam defines what they are, or how they were able to think about Hashem while they engage with this world. Why is it that the Rambam says that's not something that he can train? What exactly about that? Why could they do it and we can't? Where do I get this idea from? That they're different. So let's see what he says. Let's read paragraph number 20. Those four, okay, the four of them, is bara his achdus with Hashem. Sheidu ala ksuvim. The unity with Hashem that the Psukim testify about is clear. Very important expression Rambam uses, that Avraham, Yitzchak, and Moshe united with Hashem. Okay? Yeah, I don't know. Right. Okay? Where does it say that in the Psukim? They united with Hashem. When anyone above the Rambam talks about uniting with Hashem, everyone's like, you can't say that. Chas v'shalom, you can't unite with Hashem. But the Rambam could say it. The Rambam does say it. So Avadi, you have to know what he means. And he does a beautiful move over here. He says, Kavanasi lahasagas avasai. He walks it back. I mean, they were masik Hashem and they loved him. But he said those words. He said they united with Hashem. He said those words. He didn't have to say that. He could have said he was masik and loved him. So the Rambam says, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Moshe united with Hashem. And that's very important because, why am I just mentioning this? Because this whole business the Rambam is telling us is that there is a possibility of bridging this gap between Hashem and the world, right? And the whole teaching of the chapter is there's an unbridgeable gap. But these people did succeed in bridging that gap. And that's, I think there's a reason why the Rambam is using that expression over here, because this is the sharpest way to say it. What uniting with Hashem means, whatever it means, the expression of saying united with Hashem is the best way of saying, okay, there were people that bridged the gap between Hashem and the world. Okay? Unless you say they united with Hashem as in they weren't part of the world. Okay, maybe it depends on how you explain uniting with Hashem. Fine. Okay, but let's do that. What?
The rest of that paragraph implies they're still within the world.
Right, but the question is what you mean by they. Okay?
Uniting with Hashem mean bringing him here or mean leaving him
Right.
here?
Right. In other words, maybe they were their minds were with God, and they were just doing it with their limbs, like he says earlier, right? So that might not be them. Okay. And furthermore, says the Rambam, there's hashgacha over them and their descendants, right? There's this cool thing called Am Yisrael, and it's a very cool thing happens with these people, which is that there's hashgacha on them. And by the way, this is the only place, I think, in the Sefer, not the only place in the Rambam's corpus, he writes about this in the Gerst Chitzim as well, where he talks about the fact that there's hashgacha on Klal Yisrael. It's a very cool thing, hashgacha on Klal Yisrael. And that's why people say, incorrectly, that according to Rambam says that in order to earn hashgacha, you have to be connected with Hashem, and you have to think about Hashem, and everyone says, oh, it's only very few people have hashgacha, and anyone that says something happened to me by hashgacha, according to Rambam, it can't be, because you're not a Navi, you're not a tzaddik. It's not true. Because Rambam over here says that the hashgacha that was earned by the Avis was not only for them, it was for their descendants. So therefore, yes, hashgacha depends on being with Hashem, but Avraham earned it, and he earned it not just for him, but for his descendants. So as part of Klal Yisrael, you could have hashgacha. Well, I think this kind of hashgacha would probably matter. It would probably depend how much you're contributing to the collective. But the idea that let's say, my mezuzah is going to get a hole in a certain letter, and then bad things are going to happen to me. I think the Rambam could accept that as a form of hashgacha. Who are you, and why would Hashem operate in weird ways? Well, actually, if I cared, since you're such a shaita, therefore Hashem has to operate with you in weird ways because you're not going to get it any other ways. But He's actually not doing it for you; He's doing it for Avraham Avinu. And Avraham Avinu's descendants are into wudgy budgy. Poor Avraham, I feel so bad for him, but that's the way it is. So Hashem is going to work with that for Avraham Avinu. Gets it.
So it's not Kuzri asked or he's decided they have special.
No, he's saying there's a fact that the people founded a nation, and that's a continuation of them, and therefore, if they earned hashgacha, then that would include that their nation should, their affairs of the nation should be ordered, right?
What about the end of paragraph 25? It says, "Ein sam shnei yachid
Yeah,
v'tzibur,"
yeah.
which to me means it's not just automatic unearned. When the tzibur is pointed to Hashem, they have hashgacha.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
when they're not, they're not.
Okay, that's very
You
interesting.
seem
Yeah.
to be describing something different.
Okay, that's very good. That's a very interesting point you're raising. I want to get to that,
Already said it.
right?
So
Well, but it turns out their difference.
Their level of attachment, not that they weren't attached and they got hashgacha. He's saying their level.
No,
of attachment
he's pointing. The end of 25, the Rambam says that the tzibur,
right.
when al kein elokai b'kib mitzvah eila, is because the tzibur is not thinking about Hashem. So, and he's pointing out that the tzibur's hashgacha, which I'm claiming is just about Avraham thought about Hashem. Now we don't think about Hashem.
It's genetic.
Now it's
I'm saying
not
it's
genetic. One second, not genetic. There's hashgacha on Avram, and hashgacha on Avram involves that his
and his
children.
offspring will have hashgacha.
So now he's saying, but the Rambam says that the offspring have to think about Hashem. Okay, it's a very good question. We have to think about, and this is what I'm getting to with this whole shmooze today. We have to think about the very interesting thing that happens over here. I don't think it's just this automatic thing. Okay, Avram earned that his descendants should have it. Why? Because why do his descendants have hashgacha? In other words, if I earn hashgacha, will my descendants have hashgacha? It's Dafka Avraham Yitzchak had this cool thing. Why? Because, Okay, but that's begging the question. Why did he make the covenant that he made with them was that he's going to have hashgacha on them and the zera? So that's what I'm trying to understand. What about them merited that? The answer is that they were establishing a nation. They weren't just tzaddikim who were very close to Hashem and Hashem's mashgiach on them, because Rambam says Hashem's mashgiach on tzaddikim. And by the way, hashgacha on them includes that your daris are protected. No. Their whole avodas Hashem, as Rambam defines avodas Hashem here, the next paragraph over here, he says when they were serving Hashem by establishing a nation. So the reason why the hashgacha on them extended to the nation is because that was their nature of serving Hashem, was by establishing a nation. And therefore, to your point, I don't think the hashgacha on the nation is going to be free. Right, because it's because they were serving Hashem L'man Hashem Yitzavas Banos Beisa Derech Achor, of the whole avodah was to establish a nation, and that was the nature of the connection to Hashem. Therefore, Hashem connected it back to them, was Mashgiach on them to support the nation in this task of Shomu Derech Hashem Lasat Tzedakah Mishpat. Okay, so the one thing to think about, this is what I'm going to get in the shir today, is that, and this is I think a very interesting question. What exactly is a tzibur? Meaning, how does a tzibur think? Okay, a tzaddik thinks about Hashem as a yachid. We know how people think. Okay. And for them, actually, the best way to think is to separate from this world. What about a tzibur? How does a tzibur think about it? Does a tzibur think? Okay, what is that exactly? Okay, this is what.
We're saying here, about how as long as the Israel are here, the Shemayim arts,
Yeah.
they're not going to cease in essence. Maybe
Right.
About Hashem, somebody can't die when they think about Hashem.
Right.
So if we have as a collective that somebody there, part of the collective, is thinking about Hashem, you can't have an Israel cease to exist.
So as long as they're preserving. Because like
they think about
Avraham's
Hashem,
thinking.
So they can't be killed.
Yeah. So the question is whether that's preserved. Very good. The question is whether that's preserved through one individual or once we transfer the kind of avodas Hashem from a yachid to a tzibur. I think it's not. I don't think it's because there's one person thinking about it, a la Avraham Velazhner, right? There's one person learning. I think there's a kind of collective consciousness. So, but I don't mean collective. We'll see about that.
Is that the sum of many individual consciousnesses?
Think
or is
so.
it something else?
Let's see. Let's think
that
about it.
emerges?
Huh? Let's see. He says he called the group think. Can I get some water, please? Give me some chesed and tzedakah. Okay. We have to look at the parak of chesed and tzedakah. Well, no, it's tzedakah, not chesed. Chesed is when you do a kindness for no reason. Tzedakah is when you do something that's right.
So
It's
the
fair.
differentiating factor between Avis and Moshe is that they were working to establish an ummah.
I was Moshe and us, you mean?
No.
Oh, I was and Moshe. No, the Rambam puts together all of them
The
here.
differentiating factor between Avis and Moshe is that they were trying to establish an ummah. We are that ummah that they were trying to establish. But why does that
Oh,
avoid
differentiate
this-
between us and them four, you mean?
Right,
Yes.
between everybody in the
Yeah.
But why does that avoid this stop at Lamashal Yeshua?
Right.
I mean, like, why?
It's a very interesting question. Okay.
I would like to define a little bit.
Yeah.
What was that avoid? What was the goal of their
Yeah. Well, I guess. Yeah. At what point are you creating the nation? At what point
And
is
at
you
what
part of a
point-
nation? Right. It's a very interesting question. It's an excellent question.
This is tangential. Well, aside from the letter to the people, is there any other letters in the Rambam that where
I mean, in Gersh Tchias HaMeisim, he references the Moira, but about the Moira, I think that's the only one. I think so, off the top of my head. By the way, what did you say he writes to him about? You said something related to this chapter. I forgot to look it up. He said he wrote in his letter to Vintamon, there's something about this chapter?
I told you.
Something
Ibn
about-
Tibba expressly asked him about
Yeah.
the contradiction between Hashgacha here and
Oh.
Hashgacha.
Oh, okay.
And Rambam famously chose to ignore respond.
Oh, that's the one thing he didn't respond to. Okay.
And
Okay.
everything else on his letter he responded to, he did not respond to this.
Shh.
And then Ibn Tibba in his sefer,
Kavod Mayim, maybe? Kavod Shem?
exactly,
Yeah.
he teaches this whole chapter
Okay.
up that Maves is not Maves to
Yeah.
a real Adam. So
okay.
that's how he.
That's how he saved from
squared the
death.
circle from 51. Shtigl Strauss.
Yeah, right. Okay, so yeah, Ibn Tibbon is good. Is very, speaking before about others farm to shed light on the Rambam. He's very definitely beneficial. Read his others farm. I mean, yeah, just to get someone's understanding of the Rambam. His purish on Kahalas, Nefesh Adam. Okay, you see like what happens if someone takes the Rambam and takes it further, or stands up to the Rambam. Good. Okay, I have to look that up. Fine. So, let's read inside. Let's read what's going on over here. Okay, so Hashkachas Hashem alim al tzatzim achim gedol. It's great hashkach on them and their descendants. V'im zeis, even though they were united with Hashem and achieved hashkach, they weren't hermits. They were busy with people. Tzvias nechasim shtats bekinyan. They were making property, acquiring assets, and working on acquiring things. That to me is a proof. Okay, so it must be they were just doing it with their limbs, and at the same time, in their mind, they didn't stop thinking about Hashem. Then Rambam adds another thing, and it's not clear to me what's the connection between this and the thing he just said. How was it that they were completely whole with Hashem? And Hashgacha continued. Now he just said how, because they were thinking about Hashem. So, but now he adds something else. And he gives more examples for some reason. Who? Because when they're doing those actions, their purpose was to become close to Hashem. How are they trying to become close to Hashem? Because the purpose in their actions in their life was to bring into existence a nation that's going to know Hashem. All their purpose in their actions was to spread Yichud Hashem ba'olam, and that lechin also b'yodam dargazu ki oisim is asking avodah tzrufa gedad. What's the connection between 1 and 2? Are there two conditions over here? That A, you have to be thinking about Hashem, and B, you have to be doing something that's purpose is to come close to Hashem? Or I'm going to go read it this way for now. You cannot achieve thinking about Hashem while you're doing something else, unless that other thing you're doing itself is its goal, its purpose is to bring you close to Hashem. In other words, it's impossible. The Rambam's claiming it's impossible. Go try it, right? We can think about Hashem. Rambam says we can train us to think about Hashem, but you cannot think about Hashem at the same time doing something else. Rambam holds you can't do that. We should go try it. Everyone should try this. Really should try it. Rambam claims you can't do it. And by the way, what does that mean? You can't think about Hashem. It doesn't mean you can't think about Hashem. It means there's going to be a part of you that cares, that's distracted, that is taking seriously whatever it is you're doing. Cannot drink water and have that same pure kind of thought about Hashem as when you're not drinking water. That's what Rambam says. The others could, and I'm reading it as because that's number one, they could. That's paragraph number 20. And why were they able to do that and we can't? Is because what they were doing was, the purpose of what they were doing was to bring a nation, to bring to existence a nation that's going to know Hashem and serve Him, as the pasuk says about Yaakov. And therefore, what they were doing was a pure kind of worship. Okay. So, what the Rambam is telling us is that, the Rambam could tell us to do everything L'Shem Shamayim. He does. In Hilchos Deis and in Shemona Prakim, he says everything a person does, he should think and intend L'Shem Shamayim. That's something he could train towards. What he cannot train us to do is to have that pure thought about Hashem at the same time that we're doing that other activity. You could decide, I'm going to eat because I need to be healthy because X, Y, Z. That anyone could do. That the Rambam could do. But you can, and then if you do that, you're not less than a Navi, as Yaakov pointed out last week. So the level that he's training to in this chapter, which is to be a level of a Navi, part of that is to do everything Shem Shemayim, perhaps. But this is much more than that. This is at the moment you're engaged in this world, you're at the same time in your mind, you're completely consumed with Hashem. And that, only they could do it because only they were establishing a nation. Okay? That's what Rambam seems to be saying. And that we can't establish a nation. Why can't we establish a nation? Because that would be undermining the establishment of the nation that happened already. We are part of the nation. And I think where the Rambam got this idea from is, it's not the Rambam's idea. I think the Rambam got this from Tanakh, because if you look at Tanakh, there's a big difference between the treatment of Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov and Moshe, call them the four, and everyone else. Those four, the Torah is very concerned with their personal lives. After them, perhaps David is the Yitzim Naklal. Talk about David soon. We'll get a little back to David. But after that, the word of Hashem, Divine Hashem, which is Tanakh, is concerned with the nation. And okay, there's prophets who speak up, but we don't care about their lives. We only care about the national life. It means for the revelation of Hashem, which is the record of the revelation of Hashem, is Tanakh. There's four individuals, and then there's a nation. So Hashem is revealed through a story of four individuals, and then through a story of a nation. Why? Why can't the revelation of Hashem happen through Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, who bought a chicken from his neighbor, and then the neighbor said, let's dig a well, and so on and so forth, whatever. And they got into a fight, and then it worked out, and so on. And he went there. Why can't that be part of the story of how Hashem is revealed in the world? Why not?
Can you clarify that what that question is? Are you asking why an ummah is necessary for this
No.
expression, or are you asking
No.
something else? What exactly are you asking?
I'm asking why the concern of Tanakh, Tanakh tells us how Hashem is revealed in the world. And it tells us that through four individuals, and then after those four individuals, it tells us how Hashem is revealed through the affairs of the nation. Why can't any individual, after those four, be the conduit for Hashem's revelation in the world, such that his story should be recorded in Tanakh? Why isn't there a book of, like Bereshis, about Shua ben Nun?
Are there not, like you mentioned David, are there not many characters in Tanakh whose personal lives are recorded?
No, I don't think so. Meaning, no. Shimshon, it's all,
Shimshon is the first one
Shimshon.
that came to mind.
Yeah, but Shimshon is because of the people. In other words,
No.
Okay. David, I don't know. What? No, Yon is a story of Nevuah. Yon is a story about Nevuah. It's not a story about a person's life. We don't know how he was born. We don't know where he went. What?
I think he leaves space.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that.
Yeah, he
Okay.
leaves space to say that it's not.
Okay. Anyways, in the mashal, yeah.
But it feels like there's many characters throughout Tanakh. Maybe not
I don't think
a
so.
dozen, but not.
I don't think there are characters that we care about their life as such. In other words, it's necessary because he appears on the scene. Again, it's not about his personal life. It's about how much he contributed. It's about his contribution to the people. You could argue that Moshe is that also. That's the argument I think goes the other way. That where do we see Moshe's personal life being such a concern? Moshe?
There's some stories in the beginning, and then that's it. Parsha Shmos, and
Right.
then that's it.
Right, except the whole Torah is tracking his life. And
It's his life through the lens of Klal Yisrael.
yeah,
Especially
I don't know. What?
Especially once you get Tarzina.
Okay, so maybe this point is wrong. Right? Under considered, under thought. I'll admit that. So Akapanim, I'm saying that's I think the Rambam got it from. Oh, because we have a national wealth fund. What do you mean, all those sheep? And where do you think they came from? All those chamarim and gemalim. In a sovereign wealth fund. It came from nowhere. I guess the question is, they went to Mitzrayim. Wait a second, it's a good question. They went to Mitzrayim. Did it help them that, the guy's like, my great-great-grandfather was a millionaire. Yaakov, he had like a lot of sheep. What did it do for them? Right? That's essentially the question, I guess. How did that? Unless that wasn't their intention. That's an interesting question. Okay. But the Rambam seems to say that they wanted, maybe power. Maybe they needed power to be powerful people, to be known. In order to someone to say, like Avraham, like Yitzchak, like Yaakov to power, they needed material wealth as well, perhaps. That's an interesting question. Okay, so the Rambam is saying, so I think the Rambam notices the Tanakh, but you're telling me that this is underdeveloped, the sort, and I admit that. But the Rambam is saying like this, that nobody could do what they did, because in order to do what they were doing, it's not enough to do everything Shem Shemayim. You have to be doing it to form something, to create. Lahavi l'dei mitzius, an ummah. And what that means is like this, that you can believe Hashem wants you to eat and drink. That's called Komasach Yud Hashem Shemayim. You know why you should eat and drink. That's awesome. But the fact is, when you're eating and drinking, you're believing in it. In eating and drinking, in and of itself, you're connected to it psychically, mentally, and therefore you cannot be completely thinking about Hashem. What they were doing is they were co-creators with Hashem. They were creating something new. In Echanami, what they were creating was something material, but they were creating it. They were bringing something into being, bringing something into existence. I'm using a very interesting expression, bring to existence, like creation. So if you're involved in creation, even though it's a material creation, but if you're involved in a creation, that puts you at a certain remove from what you're doing, because you're doing it as a mashpia. You're not in it, you're above it, sort of, and therefore you have like a God's eye view of what you're doing, so that they could be with Hashem while at the same time they're doing things in this world. Okay. So therefore, why can't we do that? Because we're not founders. Well, what are we then instead? We're Jews, which means we are doomed, as it were, to not be as great as Moshe, Avraham, and Yaakov. In fact, we actually have to participate as good Jews. We have to participate in being a part of the nation, which is the very thing that they founded through material means. But since they were founding it, they were able to not be influenced by the material things that they were engaging with. We are a part of those material things. So we are stuck in the world of nationhood, material world of nation. Now, let's put it this way. The Rambam cannot advocate in this parak for. Wait, I'm going the other way now. Hold on a second. I'm going to get to that soon. The Rambam cannot tell us the Rambam could tell us one of two things. He could tell us, let's say, to completely leave this world behind and die, but he doesn't tell us to do that. He wants us to eat and drink. He could tell us, you want to eat and drink like God, you have to be doing a God-like project. But the God-like project has already been done. Because the only God-like project that a man can do in this world is establish a nation that's going to affect Yichud Hashem Ba'olam. And that has already been taken by these great people. What?
The whole point of the Ummah is also to operate.
Right.
They also have to do something.
Right.
Meaning it's not just you've created an ummah that thinks about Hashem. You also
Right.
do the mitzvahs.
Well, here's the thing. See, Tavad also can mean to think about Hashem.
Could be,
You could say like this: they created the conditions.
but it's also Sheteda
That-
Hashem first,
Right.
and then
Right. That's very that's excellent diak, because here the Rambam says and early in this chapter he identified it too. He said that knowledge of Hashem is the way of worshiping Him. So what does he mean by this Tavad? What? Yeah, unless it's the kind of turning away from everything else. First you need to ask Hashem, and then you're over Him by turning away from everything else. That's what he says early in the chapter. Okay, it's very interesting diak to look at. Okay. So, by the way, the Rambam says, Mikey Stone was more of this to me. The Rambam says about Mashiach in Hilchos Tshuva, the Rambam says he's carved me Moshe, close to Moshe. So perhaps being close to Moshe means he's actually going to do something new. Because he's going to be engaged in creating some kind of ummah, or an upgraded ummah, whether that's because he's going to bring back Bnei Yisrael to something, so it's like a recreation, or it's because he's going to make the whole world join, so there's something new. So in that sense, he could be close to Moshe. And that's, I want to go back to David, and I would suggest that David, who the Rambam calls the Mashiach HaRishon, is trying to do that. So if my observation is correct about, if you look at Tanakh, and the Tanakh is concerned with individuals, yeah, there could be an individual who are waiting for that. We're waiting for, like in Zaire, and this one's called the fourth leg of the Merkavah, David, and then Mashiach completes that. So even the Rambam might agree that there's still something to do when there's something to do, but he's not doing that. The Rambam is about Mashiach. We can observe, we can notice that.
He can't guide us because it's no longer necessary, and therefore it's not possible to do it.
The only way to do
It's
it.
only possible when it was necessary.
Yes, exactly. And if someone would do that today, he'd be undermining what Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe created, because they created the system that you're a part of. And if you believe in that, and we do, then that basically says don't found a nation, right? Let's say I'm starting a new religion, okay? It's not going to work because Moshe already cornered the market on that. He did the best job. So basically, there's a difference between being a founder, that's what he's saying. There's being a founder, being a part of it. And you can't get past that. But on the other hand, it means that we're less than them. So that's why we have to daven. Because when you recognize that you're less than them, you have a problem with that. That's fair. You don't want to be less than them. But you can't. The only way we know how to be like them is to be a founder, and they were the founders already. So that's where tefillah comes in. We don't know. We can't get out. I don't know. I think you asked me this. What?
I asked you a different question last. Last thing I said, why are you davening to change human nature? So
Right.
do that. Now I'm saying, what are you davening for? If their mission was accomplished, then why do I say I can't be like them? This is no longer achievable. It's not like
Okay,
less
because
than.
no, we are less than them because we cannot be in the presence of Hashem while we're engaged with this world. So it's like we are doomed to, like Rambam's Mashal Gimel Ches, like the person who Gimel Ches, like the person who was commanded to carry around Zevel. He doesn't want to do that. It's not Geshmak. He recognizes that engagement with this world is problematic because at the same time with the engagement, so we can't think about Hashem. And I don't like that, but I'm supposed to do it. So I want to daven to Hashem to save me from this mitzukah. Why not? Your question relates to your question. How is Hashem supposed to save me? It's tefillah for an ace. Okay, I don't know. It's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. Without having an idea of how Hashem is supposed to save me from this predicament, can I daven for
You're
it?
saying save me from being a human. That's really the nature of the tefillah.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
Well,
Save
no,
me
it's
from being a
saving.
human in 2026 with
Right.
already is a Numa, and I can do nothing to further that goal.
Exactly. Kids Ram's like, I wish I could be Mashiach, but I'm not. Okay, forget about Mashiach. Ram's not holding by Mashiach. Wasn't the Trik Sakets, whatever. Ram couldn't be Mashiach. So, but Lamaisa, he recognized that being Mashiach would have unlocked kind of the highest spiritual attainments, and this is a problem. Now, what's the solution is interesting. Like, how did Hashem help him, and what is he asking Hashem for is a very interesting question. I don't know, maybe somehow like achieving that kind of consciousness, Avraham consciousness, even though he's not doing the same thing. I don't know. I'm not sure what exactly. I mean, that gets to the Hebben Nifla that was in Skeleton was the answer to his prayer. What was he thinking when he davened? I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, so I wanted to let's see if we can get to the end of what I'm trying to get at over here. So in paragraph number 21, the Rambam says the purpose of these people was to bring it into existence a nation that's going to know Hashem, and he brings the pasuk of Manish Tzav as one of his basic achrav. Avram's connection to Hashem was there in order that he command his children and family. Okay. The end of the pasuk that the Mifam B'Shater edition helpfully provides, we all know, is Shomu Derech Hashem Lasis Stako Mishpat. So Avraham taught the people Stako Mishpat. Okay. And this nation preserves the Derech Hashem because they preserved Stako Mishpat. Perek Nundal Nemar Nevuchim tells us Chesed Stako Mishpat is what it's all about. Chesed Mishpat is Stako. And Hashem did not abandon the earth. On the contrary, He cares about the earth and He orders it. And Chesed Mishpat is Stako. Okay. Not like the philosophers. So I want to say like this. I want to bring out a point of view. I want to put together two things. The Hainu, Avraham made a nation that's going to be Shomer Derech Hashem. So, how are they Shomer Derech Hashem? They do Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. That nation has Hashem's Hashgacha, and unlike the philosophers say that Hashem abandoned the earth, no, Hashem is manifest in the earth in that He does Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah B'Aretz. So I want to connect these two things. The Hainu, because Avraham made a nation that's focused on the Derech Hashem, Alasas Stako Mishpat. Therefore, because Avraham was engaged in that, therefore the Hashgacha was attended to Avraham and to his descendants. And what is the Hashgacha on his descendants? That Hashem is Isaac, Hashem is Stako B'Aretz. In other words, the very thing that Avraham was focused on in his training his household is the nature of the Hashgacha. Put simply, when we say that Hashem is Mashgiach and Klal Yisrael, what does that mean? That means that the affairs of Klal Yisrael happen according to Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. So this that the Rambam says in the end, that is the Hashgacha. Hashgacha is that things shouldn't be tzaddik v'raloi. Things should be fair. What are the rules of fairness? Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. So the Rambam says in the end of the Sefer that no, Hashem was not Isaac the Aretz. It's the same thing as happened over here because Avraham was connected to Hashem, and Avraham was Hashgacha Mes Tzedakah. That how did he earn that? By being miyasid an ummah that will be Shomer Derech Hashem, he earned that the Derech Hashem should be manifest in that ummah. Okay? What do they do? What do they do to earn Hashgacha? They established a nation. What's a nation? A nation is something that has a certain kind of order, a certain kind of rules. And what are the rules of this nation? The rules of this nation are the Hashgacha of Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. Okay? So now I want to get back to the tension in this parak and the same tension in Perek Nun Dalet. In Perek Nun Dalet, the Rambam says two things. Let's start with Perek Nun Dalet. He says on the one hand, okay, if you have perfect character, that's just for someone else. Because if you'd be by yourself, you wouldn't need it. So that's not interesting. What's interesting is knowing Hashem because that's about you. And then he says, the Navi says you have to know Hashem who's Isaac Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah B'Aretz. It is about emulating Hashem. So which one is it? The answer is like this, L'daiti. From one perspective, taken, let's say, philosophically speaking, what the essence of human is, a human's perfection involves his intellect. That's what a human is. Okay. But then we have something very interesting happen in the world. That the people who were most cleaved to Hashem, such that they were even able to create new things for Hashem, they created a new reality. And what's that new reality they created? A nation that's going to represent the Derech Hashem B'Aretz. Because they are the nation of Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. Okay? So something new happened. And that very thing that they created earned Hashgacha. So I have a question for you, very, very simple question. You're a guy who's like, okay, I want to perfect myself. Perfect myself involves perfect my intellect. Fine, fair. At the same time, you recognize that there's a reality, that there's a certain nation, Hashem is mashgiach on them, they earn a kind of order called Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah. Does that then mean that you personally engaging in Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah is serving Hashem? Or to state simply, should you prefer to engage in Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, or should you prefer to say, no, I want to only think? There's two options that Rambam puts forth in Perek Nun Dalet. So he starts with saying you should think. That's what life is all about, thinking. But what if there's a nation that channels Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah in their affairs? Their existence, the very existence tells you that Hashem is interested, as Rambam says in the Perek Nun Dalet, Hashem is interested in revealing Himself through His ways. So now, supporting that revelation, being part of those ways, becomes a new form of Avodas Hashem. So while from one perspective, let's say pre-Avraham, Yitzchak, and Moshe, serving Hashem is thinking. But once they created this new reality that there's a nation that represents Yichad Hashem Ba'olam, as he calls it, we'll talk about in a minute, then in being engaged in that kind of activity of Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, which is the essence of the Hashgacha on the nation, becomes a kind of Avodas Hashem that's not there for your friend, it's for Hashem. Why is it for Hashem? Because Hashem decided to be Mashgiach. blank. Let's say I see Hashem doing something. I see Hashem doing some order. I see that every time I move the sefer, Hashem moves it back. A nace happens. So then a nace happens and moves back to the other side of the table. So then me moving the sefer back to the other side of the table is Avodas Hashem. Because Hashem wants it. So therefore, once this whole thing happened, that there was creation of a nation, that this nation, through their affairs, embodies, brings forth these specific drachim, and that itself is what affects the inflection that we see in this chapter and the next chapter, and in Perplexed. On the one hand, we should say everything is about transcending the world, and serving Hashem is through thought. On the other hand, something interesting happened between now and the year 0, which is that there was this nation founded by these very cool people, and that earned kind of intervention, we'll call it now, which is Divine Providence. Divine Providence means Hashem reveals himself through the affairs, through the history of this nation. He reveals Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah. Well, then that means that Hashem, even though Hashem is not Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah, Hashem transcends all that, but nonetheless Hashem cares to have this kind of revelation, Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah. So therefore, by me supporting the revelation, which is the final word in Perplexed, I'm actually doing God's work in this world. And I think when the Rambam uses this lashon about Avraham and Yaakov, he says they wanted to spread Yichud Hashem ba'olam. Yichud Hashem ba'olam. And I would suggest that this interesting expression, which you have to look in the Rambam's corpus, says use this expression. This is in paragraph number 21. They were there to spread Yichud Hashem ba'olam. He wrote that in Hebrew. Yichud Hashem ba'olam. How do you spread Yichud Hashem ba'olam? Yichud Hashem is a fact about Hashem's unity. He doesn't say, does he say to spread the knowledge of that? You have to look at the Arabic. He doesn't say to spread the knowledge of Yichud Hashem in the world. And also, it's a very interesting expression, Yichud Hashem ba'olam. I would suggest that Rambam is trying to tell us this idea. Yeah, that it's like a new dimension of Yichud Hashem. Yichud Hashem, taken in and of itself, is what the Navi doesn't say. The Navi doesn't say Ani Hashem Echad. Ani Hashem Echad means forget about this world, nothing to do with this world. Yichud Hashem ba'olam means like a new dimension of Yichud Hashem. What's a new dimension of Yichud Hashem? How do you have a new dimension of Yichud Hashem? Take the affairs of this world, which are not Yichud Hashem, they're not Hashem. But all of a sudden, they reflect a kind of unity. Well, how do they reflect unity? Because they reflect the ways that follow from Hashem Echad. How do they follow from Hashem Echad? Different mystery, go back to the Prakim of time. But the fact is, besides for Hashem Echad, there's also His ways. And if there's a kind of pattern, a kind of order, and that order is Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah, that's called Yichud Hashem ba'olam, because that's a kind of material order that's not Yichud Hashem, but it's a representation of Yichud Hashem, or it's how Yichud Hashem would look if it was transferred to the dimension of a material dimension. That's what I suggest that was Rambam saying with Yichud Hashem.
Does that avodah require thinking about Hashem? Or is it sufficient to just do Chesed?
Very excellent question. Excellent question. I think, right, it's a very interesting question. I think,
thinking about Hashem even necessary?
Oh, very good. So I think the Rambam holds very good. So now, why don't we just go the other way, legamri, and forget about Hashem and just do Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah? That's a very interesting question. I think that's why the Rambam has to set up this kind of tension in Perplexed and also in this parak, because he does not think you can do that. He does not think you can think about Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah without thinking about Hashem. Now, why? That's a very interesting question.
Is it that you can't do it while thinking about Hashem, or without having a hasag of Hashem, you wouldn't be able to discern what is Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah?
You're right. That's what I think. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, I think so. I think so. But that's you're right. That is the right question to ask.
It's like the pasuk in Isaiah plays offense. There's ki chesed kapasti.
Right.
And then it's the das alakim me'elos.
Right.
So first it's talking about chesed. You think it's about the doing, and then it goes to the das alakim me'elos.
Very interesting. Okay. But the thing is, Das Hashem could mean his Torah, like in Yirmiyah. Haskevadeh Isik Hashem Isik Chesed. So, not so clear. And that's how the Rambam would read that pasuk. Is Das Hashem in that pasuk also mean Das Hashem in his drachim, like it means in Yirmiyah? It's an interesting question.
Are they just midas taivas? Or are they
Yeah. Okay, good. So in other words, in Perplexed, the Rambam says midas taivas, that's for the other guy.
So is it like
Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah, that's already. Is that right? That's what you're asking. Is that just another way of saying midas taivas, or are these terms?
midas taivas? Because then he's saying, okay, you can't do it amongst yourself, but it sounds this like universalist thing, which was spread around everywhere, including the garden.
Which one?
This chesed.
Chesed Mishpud Tzedakah, right? Ba'aretz, right?
Which is why you can't do it amongst yourselves. Right? If you follow his analogy here, it's can't do midas taivas.
Right.
If there was nobody else there, there were no garden,
Right.
would we be able to do it ourselves?
No one at all.
Is it-
Saying
right.
if you're by yourself, yeah.
But is it our job? Is this one of those universalist things where he's like, he didn't have a job to spread this around the rest of the world?
Yeah, I think so. And I think Yichud Hashem ba'olam is also, that's the point of saying Yichud Hashem ba'olam, is that there's a mitzvah of spreading this, yeah, and the spreading in the world, spreading Yichud Hashem ba'olam. I'm suggesting, and it's a little speculative what I'm saying. I'll admit that. I'm suggesting that spreading Yichud Hashem ba'olam means spreading Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, because the more there's Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, the more the tzibur is tuned into Yichud Hashem. Because as we discussed before, tzibur doesn't think, but a tzibur has, I don't know, something like thinking, group think. I don't know what exactly is going on with them. Maybe you call it another dimension. What? Yeah, collective consciousness, something like that. And I think Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, I think it's partial like that. The mice, if you imagine a tzibur that's very orderly in terms of their political order, Chesed Mishpat Tzedakah, they would be more oriented. Let's say, that's Hashem Echad, right? You guys want to finish up? You can go, by the way, if you need to go. Okay, oh, fine. I just want to finish up over here. Okay. So I think that's Yichud Hashem ba'olam. Okay, and remember at the end of Perek Dalet, he said, what's he promising with the Sefer? You and those who are like you, and Kol Yisrael Chaverim. Kol Yisrael Chaverim. In other words, there's a unit that's not an individual. That's the Chiddush. Kol Yisrael Chaverim is the big Chiddush of the whole Sefer, because ultimately the Sefer comes around to Klal Yisrael. You know, one of the questions about the Rambam is like how much, like, comparing him to the Kozri, is Am Yisrael a thing? So these are two places where Am Yisrael is a big thing. Other places also in the Torah. But here where he says that they miyasid an ummah, and the hashgacha is on their descendants, and his final word about the Sefer is it's for us, and Kol Yisrael Chaverim. And why is he using this expression, Kol Yisrael Chaverim? Because I think he's trying to say that it's very important to understand this work, to realize that there's a unit, there's an entity called Klal Yisrael. There's such an entity. And as an entity, and as Yaakov pointed out before, as an entity, they have their own rules. But the Rambam in paragraph number 25, in Perek Aleph, I mentioned this briefly, he says, look, the pasuk says explicitly that depending on how much we think about Hashem, we have hashgacha, because the pasuk says, why do bad things happen to us, the collective? Because God is not in our midst. And he says over there an interesting comment, even though the pasuk is about the tzibur, the yachid is the same way. So Rambam makes that point. You have to learn exactly what he's saying over here. But Rambam makes the point about this. There's two parashas. There's a parasha of Yochanan and Tzibur, but they're equivocal, or I mean, they match rather. They match. What I'm suggesting is the Rambam is being mechadesh that you're part of the ummah. Part of the ummah. Being part of the ummah because we're not Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. Therefore, we're part of the nation. Part of the nation means our job is indeed not to always be in the presence of Hashem. Our job is to actually order the affairs of this world, because something new came into being through these people who are with Hashem in a way that we can never be. I saw an interesting Sifri? No, Mechilta. Amalachas kohen v'goy kodesh. V'goy melamed shehim kiguf echad. An interesting expression. V'goy, I'm not sure what the Josh is exactly.
Why is it goy equal?
What?
Why?
I don't know. Maybe it's on the pasuk goy echad. What? Oh, interesting. Okay, I think that's okay. We have to look this up. But so it got me thinking about this idea. Okay, so let's say you look at Klal Yisrael as an entity. So what's their seichel? That's what I was saying before. Like, okay, an individual has seichel. What corresponds to seichel in the tzibur? I would suggest that's chesed mishpat tzedakah. In other words, they don't think, but they reflect thought through their order. Okay, so that's it. So really it's all revolving on hashgacha, meaning the fact there was hashgacha on the Avis, because they were the founders, that kind of hashgacha has continued in the people, and it continues them to the extent, as we discussed before, to the extent that they are continuing the chesed mishpat tzedakah, not to the extent that they're thinking about Hashem in the same way the Avis were, because that's not their job. And in fact, if you're a member of Klal Yisrael, you can't think about the Avis in the same way that they should. You should still think about them when you're not engaged with this world. But you also have to engage with this world because you're a Jew, and if you disengage with this world, you're actually undermining the whole project of the Avis, which was to create an ummah that's Yichud Hashem ba'olam. So we, as the ones who are stuck in that project, those of us who can imagine Avraham Yaakov, tak after daven. That's exactly what Rambam is doing over here. I can train you to know. Look, I have to go to work and I have to live because I'm a Jew. I'm not someone who thinks we have to transcend this world and leave it behind, because no, they created a nation that's in this world. On the other hand, the only time I can think about Hashem is when I'm not doing work. Okay, so I'll have my work life and I'll have my thinking about Hashem life. Not kishmak. You want to be Avraham Yaakov? So that's where the Rambam's tefillah comes in. Okay, we'll leave it at that.
How does the chesed mishpat tzedakah
We'll leave the recording on the yeah.
back to the world? How does that fit with the notion of tzarchan and the notion of
Yeah, that's a very good question.
and just trying to
Right.
Like, it feels like
I know.
it's a detour around the ultimate destination.
Right. That's why I think the Rambam believes in Gilgal. No, meaning it has to be that. It has to be. I suspect that maybe we spoke about this once. That like if you know Hashem as the source for this world, if that's the way you unite with Hashem, then you'll sort of come back to this world. We spoke about this once in the context of Moshe and Sur.
So this world
Hashem
is
did
really
create this
becoming-
world.
It should be like a proxy for Hashem in that.
Exactly, right. Yeah, I know. Maybe it's like a mashal for Hashem. I don't know if you would say that.
Is there a connection between Aleph and Dalet and the framing here that Rambam talks about Manig, Ibn Navi, that he has to reorient how he deals with people to where he's just embodying the midas. So
Without the emotions, right?
it feels like there's some kind of parallel here to where you have to engage with this world while inside you're somewhere else entirely.
Very good. Very good. I mean, the question is right. The other Rambam says that a king, if he's a Navi, is supposed to engage in his political affairs without caring. And that's an interesting parallel. That in our chapter he says, basically, you can't engage with this world and not care about it somewhat. Can't really be completely dispassionate. But maybe that depends if you're doing your own affairs or others, right? Because like we're saying, Avraham and Yaakov, they were doing it they were being miyas and luma, so they had a certain remove. So maybe a manik could have that kind of remove.
A more objective goal.
Right,
connected to
right.
them.
Right. You don't have the same subjective
It's like
experience.
Manik is engaged in a very similar activity, which is the guidance of the Ummah.
Mm-hmm. Right, but that's only in his anhaga, in his personal life. The Ummah doesn't need him. The others were, as individuals, were
There was no distinction.
right. They were creating the Ummah, physically creating the Ummah as a family thing.
Very good.
Like that's Hashem means an awareness of Hashem's existence or the nature of God.
Das Hashem means an understanding Hashem's essence.
Awareness or
Understanding. He says that in one of these chapters. He says, actually in our chapter, or is it? He says that without understanding, it's not called Dea, it's called Oila ala Lev. Yeah. In the end of paragraph 14, he says you have to know Hashem, but only after you understand Him, and that's called Dea. If you don't understand Him, it's called Oila al Ruchachem. Right.